She didn't even raise her voice. That's what stung the most. My sister leaned in, as if about to comfort me, and whispered, "You're nothing." We were standing in the hallway of the courthouse, waiting for the session to begin. My hands were trembling, not from fear of losing, but from years of being treated as invisible. That hallway smelled like old paper and polish, the kind that makes you think of forgotten documents and buried truths. But all I could focus on was her smirk and the echo of those two words, bouncing off the marble walls like a verdict I'd heard my entire life. Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching, especially since I'm finally finding the courage to tell it. I used to believe she loved me. When we were kids, I followed her around like a shadow, desperate for her approval. She was the golden child, always louder, prettier, more confident. I learned early on to take up less space, to dim my light so she could shine brighter. At family dinners, I'd wait for her to finish speaking before I'd even think of opening my mouth. And even then, I'd usually decide my words weren't worth the interruption they might cause. Sarah was 3 years older, but she might as well have been from another planet. While I spent afternoons reading in corners, she commanded attention, at the center of every room. Our parents' eyes followed her like sunflowers tracking the sun. When she got accepted to college, there was a celebration dinner. When I got a full scholarship to the same university 2 years later, Mom mentioned it casually over breakfast, like announcing the weather. I told myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself that love came in different shapes, that maybe mine was just quieter. I became the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over Sarah's dramatic exits and explosive arguments with our parents. I was the translator, explaining her moods to confused relatives, making excuses for her absence at family gatherings. When our parents passed, Dad first from a heart attack, Mom 6 months later from what the doctors called complications, but what I knew was a broken heart, Sarah took control immediately. She spoke at both funerals while I sat in the front row, silent, my throat too tight to form words. She organized the estate meetings, chose the lawyers, decided which belongings went where. I wasn't even consulted. I was informed. The house needs to be sold, she announced at the kitchen table that had witnessed thousands of our family meals. The market's good right now, and we both need the money. I looked around at the walls that held my entire childhood. The pencil marks on the door frame where Dad measured our heights every birthday. The small dent in the hallway wall where I'd accidentally thrown a baseball when I was 8. This wasn't just property to me. This was the last physical connection to the people who'd raised us, imperfect as their love had been. Maybe we could keep it, I said quietly. I could buy out your half eventually. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what money? Your little teaching salary? She leaned back in her chair, the same chair where Mom used to sit and help us with homework. Be realistic, Emma. You've never been practical about money. Remember how you wanted to major in art until Dad talked sense into you? I did remember. I also remembered that Dad hadn't talked sense into me. Sarah had. She'd spent weeks convincing our parents that I was being childish, that I needed to think about my future more seriously. By the time she was done, I'd switched to education, telling myself I was being responsible, mature. The house stays in the family, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. You are not the family, Sarah replied, and something in her tone made my blood run cold. You're the add-on, the afterthought. Mom and Dad had me, and then surprise. She gestured at me like I was a mistake that had wandered into the room. They felt sorry for you your whole life, Emma. Don't mistake pity for inheritance. I stared at her, feeling something crack inside my chest. Not break, crack, like ice beginning to split before it shatters completely. That night, I walked through the house alone. Every room held memories that suddenly felt borrowed, like I'd been a guest in my own childhood home. In my parents' bedroom, I opened Mom's jewelry box, the one with the tiny ballerina that spun when you lifted the lid. Inside, tucked beneath her wedding pearls, was a folded piece of paper. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Mom's handwriting, in the careful script she'd used for important things. Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably feeling lost. Your sister has always been a storm, but you've been our steady rain. Don't let anyone tell you that quiet strength isn't real strength. The blue folder is under the loose floorboard in your father's study. Make sure she knows we saw her. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. She, not you. She. Mom had written this note about me, but she'd addressed it to me in 3rd person, as if she already knew that someday I'd need to remember that. I was real, that I existed, that I mattered enough to be seen. The floorboard in Dad's study had been loose for years. He'd always said he'd fix it someday, but someday never came. Now I understood why. Underneath, wrapped in plastic, was a blue folder thick with documents, bank statements, insurance papers, and tucked in the very back, a will, not the one Sarah's lawyer had read to us, but an older one, dated just 6 months before Dad's death. I spread the papers across his desk, the same desk where he'd taught me to balance his business books when I was 16. You've got a head for numbers, he'd said. And more importantly, you've got a head for truth. Numbers don't lie, Emma. Remember that. As I read through the documents, his words echoed in my mind. The numbers didn't lie. The will Sarah had presented wasn't the final one. This one, the real one, told a different story entirely. I sat in Dad's chair until sunrise, not reading anymore, just thinking about all the times Sarah had spoken for me, decided for me, dismissed me, about how I'd let her, because it seemed easier than fighting, about how easier had slowly erased me from my own life. But sitting there, surrounded by proof that my parents had seen me, really seen me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt solid, real, present. I didn't confront Sarah immediately. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I planned. I researched lawyers, interviewed 3 before finding one who listened instead of assuming. Margaret Chen had kind eyes and a reputation for handling family disputes with both compassion and steel. Family law is about more than money, she told me during our first meeting. It's about justice. And sometimes justice looks like making sure the right story gets told. I gave her copies of everything. The real will. Mom's note. Bank statements that showed Dad had been quietly putting money aside in an account with only my name on it for years. Documentation of every financial decision Sarah had made without consulting me, every time she'd acted like I didn't exist. This is a strong case, Margaret said. But are you prepared for the fight? Family litigation gets ugly fast. I thought about Sarah's laugh in our childhood kitchen, about years of being the afterthought, the add-on, the one who didn't count, about Mom's careful handwriting. Make sure she knows we saw her. I'm not fighting for money, I told Margaret. I'm fighting to exist. The next few months were the hardest of my life, but also the clearest. I went to work every day, teaching 4th graders about fractions and multiplication tables, coming home to legal briefs and strategy sessions. Sarah called me twice, both times to offer what she called generous settlements if I'd just stop being difficult. This is embarrassing for both of us, she said during the second call. The family thinks you've lost your mind. Aunt Ruth said you always were the strange one, and now you're proving it. I hung up without responding, but her words followed me for days, whispering doubts in my ear during quiet moments. Maybe I was being strange. Maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe I really was nothing. Then I'd remember Mom's note, and I'd feel solid again. The courthouse hallway on the day of the hearing was exactly as I'd imagined. Cold marble, fluorescent lights, the smell of old paper, and nervous sweat. Sarah arrived with 2 lawyers and our cousin Mike, who'd always been her ally in family politics. She wore a black suit that made her look important, authoritative. I came alone except for Margaret. "Where's your support team?" Sarah asked when she saw me. Her voice was loud enough for other people to hear, calculated to make me look isolated, pathetic. I didn't answer. I'd learned, finally, that not every question deserved a response. That's when she leaned in close, pretending to offer comfort, and whispered those 2 words that would have destroyed me a year ago. "You're nothing." But something had changed in me during those months of preparation. Instead of crumbling, I felt a strange calm settle over my shoulders like a warm coat. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never noticed before. Fear. Sarah was afraid. "We'll see," I whispered back. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with worn wooden benches and windows that let in weak afternoon light. Judge Harrison looked tired, like he'd seen too many families tear themselves apart over money and pride. He was younger than I'd imagined, with graying temples and eyes that suggested he understood that legal battles were rarely just about the law. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table with her legal team, confident and composed. She kept glancing at Doyne, the gallery where a few family members had gathered, Aunt Ruth, Cousin Mike, and Sarah's college roommate, who'd somehow become a character witness. They all looked at me with expressions ranging from pity to disapproval, like I was a child throwing a tantrum over a toy that was never mine to begin with. I sat with Margaret at the defendant's table, my hands folded in my lap, breathing slowly. The blue folder that had changed everything sat open in front of my lawyer, its contents organized into neat stacks. Evidence. Truth. Proof that I had existed in my parents' eyes, even when I'd felt invisible to everyone else. The plaintiff claims that the defendant is attempting to overturn a legally executed will. Sarah's lead attorney began, his voice filling the small room with authority. "This appears to be a case of grief-driven confusion, Your Honor. The defendant has fabricated claims about a second will, presenting documents that contradict the clear intentions of the deceased." I listened to him paint me as delusional, desperate, grasping for something that had never been mine. He presented Sarah as the responsible daughter, the one who'd handled their parents' affairs with dignity and care. He made her sound like a guardian protecting the family legacy from my irrational claims. When he finished, the courtroom felt heavy with his version of the truth. I could see some of the family members nodding slightly, satisfied that the natural order was being restored. Sarah looked serene, like someone who'd already won. Then Margaret stood up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "This case isn't about competing wills. It's about recognizing the truth that's been hiding in plain sight." She walked to the evidence table and picked up a bank statement. "For the past 12 years, Mr. Robert Chen, the deceased father, made monthly deposits into a savings account that bore only his younger daughter's name, Emma Chen. These deposits were made consistently, never missing a month, even during periods when the family's main business account showed financial strain." She held up another document. "Here's a life insurance policy, updated 8 months before Mr. Chen's death, naming Emma as the sole beneficiary, not both daughters. Emma." I watched Sarah's composed expression flicker. Just for a second, but I saw it. "And here," Margaret continued, "is a handwritten note from Mrs. Helen Chen, found in the defendant's childhood bedroom after both parents had passed. The handwriting has been verified by 3 independent experts." She read Mom's note aloud, her voice gentle but firm. "Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably feeling lost. Your sister has always been a storm, but you've been our steady rain. Don't let anyone tell you that quiet strength isn't real strength. The blue folder is under the loose floorboard in your father's study. make sure she knows we saw her. The courtroom was completely silent. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, could hear Aunt Ruth shifting uncomfortably in her seat. The blue folder, Margaret said, contained the will that we're presenting today, a will dated 6 months after the one the plaintiff has been using, a will that names Emma Chen as the sole inheritor of the family home and the majority of the estate. Sarah's lawyer stood up quickly. Your Honor, the plaintiff objects to these so-called discoveries. The timing is suspicious, and the documents could easily have been forged. Objection noted, Judge Harrison said, but he was studying the documents Margaret had handed him. However, the court has had these documents examined by independent experts over the past 3 weeks. The paper, ink, and handwriting analysis all confirm authenticity. I felt something shift in the room, like the air pressure changing before a storm. Sarah was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not contempt, but something that looked almost like recognition, like she was seeing me for the first time. Judge Harrison read through the documents slowly, taking his time. The silence stretched so long that I started to worry something was wrong. Finally, he looked up. This is clearly a complex family situation, he said, but the law is clear about the validity of wills, and the evidence presented today demonstrates that the document dated March 15th represents the final testamentary wishes of both Robert and Helen Chen. He paused, looking directly at me. The court finds that Emma Chen is the rightful sole beneficiary of the estate in question, including the family home and all associated assets. The words hit the room like stones dropping into still water. I heard Aunt Ruth gasp. Cousin Mike muttered something under his breath. But all I could focus on was Sarah's face, watching as years of certainty crumbled behind her eyes. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. Instead, she stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, her hands clenched in her lap. Her lawyers shuffled papers and whispered among themselves, but I could tell they knew it was over. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, the court notes that the plaintiff appears to have been managing estate assets without proper authority for the past 18 months. Ms. Sarah Chen, you will need to provide a full accounting of all transactions and return any funds that were distributed improperly. Now Sarah did look at me, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't the rage I'd expected. It was something smaller, more vulnerable. For just a moment, she looked like the sister I'd followed around as a child, the one I'd thought loved me back. But the moment passed quickly. She stood up, gathering her things with sharp, angry movements. Her lawyers tried to explain something about appeals and additional legal options, but she wasn't listening. She walked toward the exit without a word, her small entourage trailing, behind her like confused mourners. As she passed my table, she stopped. I thought she might say something. Apologize, explain, acknowledge what had just happened. Instead, she leaned down, just like she had in the hallway, and whispered, "This doesn't change anything. You're still nothing to me." But this time, her words felt different, smaller, like something she was telling herself more than me. I watched her leave, and I felt empty. Not satisfied, not vindicated, just hollow. I'd won, but victory felt heavier than I'd expected. This wasn't a celebration. It was a funeral for the relationship I'd never really had but had always hoped for. Margaret squeezed my shoulder. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "Your parents wanted you to know they saw you. Now the whole world knows it too." Outside the courthouse, I sat on the steps for a long time, watching people walk by on their way to normal lives. Normal problems. I thought about calling someone, a friend, a colleague, anyone who might understand what I was feeling, but I realized I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I was enough company for myself. I drove to my parents' house, my house now, and walked through the rooms slowly. Everything looked the same, but it felt different. The walls that had witnessed my childhood, my adolescence, my years of feeling invisible, now held a different story. They'd always been mine. I just hadn't known it. In Dad's study, I knelt down and touched the loose floorboard where the blue folder had been hidden. Such a small space to hold such a big truth. I thought about all the times I'd been in this room, helping him with his books, listening to his quiet wisdom, never knowing that he'd been planning for this moment. The moment when I'd need to know that I mattered. Over the next few weeks, Sarah tried to call me several times. I didn't answer. She sent texts that started angry and gradually became pleading. She wanted to meet, to explain, to work things out like adults. I deleted them without responding, not because I was angry, though I had been. Not because I wanted to punish her, though part of me thought she deserved it. I stayed silent because I'd finally learned the difference between existing and being seen, between taking up space and deserving it. 3 months later, I was organizing Mom's bedroom when I found another note, this one tucked inside her favorite book of poetry. It was shorter than the first one, written in shakier handwriting, probably from her final weeks. Emma, you were always our quiet miracle. We never told you that enough. The house is yours not because Sarah doesn't deserve it, but because you understand what home means. You've been taking care of all of us your whole life without ever asking for credit. It's your turn to be taken care of. I cried then, finally. Not from sadness, but from relief. From the overwhelming understanding that I'd been loved all along, even when I couldn't feel it. That my parents had seen my worth even when I couldn't see it myself. I kept the house. I renovated the kitchen, painted the walls colors that made me happy, planted a garden in the backyard. I created a home that felt like me, quiet but strong, simple but meaningful. Friends started visiting regularly. Colleagues stopped by for dinner, and slowly the house filled with the kind of laughter and conversation it had been missing for years. Sarah never came by. I heard through relatives that she'd moved across the country, started over somewhere new. Part of me hoped she'd found peace. That distance had given her perspective on what we'd lost and why. But mostly, I tried not to think about her at all. Evening, almost a year after the court hearing, I was sitting in Dad's study, my study now, grading papers when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. Emma? The voice was small, uncertain. It took me a moment to recognize it. Sarah. She paused, and I could hear her breathing. I wanted to apologize. For everything. For the way I treated you. For the things I said. For not seeing you the way Mom and Dad did. I set down my red pen and looked around the room. At the family photos on the walls. At the loose floorboard that had changed everything. At the life I'd built from the ashes of our relationship. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. That means something. Do. You think... Her voice was smaller now, younger. Do you think we could ever... I don't know. Start over? I thought about the little girl who used to follow her around, desperate for approval. I thought about the young woman who dimmed her own light to let Sarah shine. I thought about the whispered words in the courthouse hallway, and the years of feeling invisible in my own family. Then I thought about Mom's notes, about Dad's careful planning, about the quiet strength I'd found in learning to exist without needing anyone else's permission. I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm willing to find out. When you're ready to see me as I am, not as who you think I should be. There was a long pause. Then, I'd like that. Someday. When I figure out how to be a sister instead of a storm. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my house, my home, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete peace with my own existence. I didn't need Sarah's approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's permission to take up space, to matter, to be seen. But maybe someday, it would be nice to have a sister again. I picked up my red pen and returned to grading papers, surrounded by the walls that had always known I belonged there. Outside, evening was settling over the neighborhood like a comfortable blanket, and inside, I was finally, completely, undeniably home. They tried to erase my name from the family story, but they couldn't delete it from the legacy I was always meant to inherit.